All right, so I am Scott Silvey, and this has been a common topic this week from workshops on Tuesday, sessions yesterday and today, even the keynote was referencing this idea of graph-powered chatbots. And so I wanted to just take a minute to talk about why. Like, why is this coming up? And before I do that, I just want to thank y'all for being here because, as she mentioned, there are puppies, right? Like, I'm competing with a lot of great talks, but there's also 8 puppies. Travis is probably going to get up right now and go check out those puppies. So the problem with 3 screens is I have to be active on the right one. All right. So I think it's fair to say that enterprises are filled with a lot of smart people, at least most of them. And they inherently understand the power of chatbots and the value that they'll provide to users, whether it's current use cases like customer support, sales enablement, or the internal automations and efficiencies that we're starting to see happen, and then all the other use cases that we haven't even imagined yet. And the problem is, I don't think that they doubt the efficacy or viability of the technology. It's really just the simple recognition that adopting these at scale, especially in the enterprise, creates some really complex challenges, right? Whether it's the security risks, we'll talk about that in a minute, some of the compliance concerns, and then also integration complexity, right? Like, I think there's at least 1 or 2 companies in here that I've worked with that has like maybe 1 system that's on legacy technology, maybe 2, and adopting chatbots and AI into those legacy systems seems like it can be really complex. And so in a world where data privacy and operational integrity are paramount, this can be a really risky proposition for a lot of companies. Because ultimately, nobody wants to be this, right? Nobody wants to sell a 2024 Chevy Tahoe for $1 with, and I quote, no takesy-backsies, right? So you may have seen this last December, I think it was, December of last year. And on one hand, it's funny, and on the other hand, there's a lot of companies where mistakes like this for a chatbot can have very real regulatory or financial concerns. So I want to talk about AI. I want to talk about AI in the intersection with graph. So I'm going to start actually with zooming out just a little bit. Not for very long, but to zoom out on a broader perspective on AI and really the road to AGI, which is artificial general intelligence, or broadly speaking, human-level intelligence. So there's this guy, Sam Altman. He's founded this company you may have heard of, OpenAI, which has launched many, many products that have really changed, in a lot of cases, not only how we work as individuals, but companies as a whole. And earlier this summer, they released these 5 levels of AI that are required to get to AGI. The first level here is chatbots, which is where we've been for the last several years. And it's introduced sea change, as I mentioned. And in a recent interview, Sam mentioned that O1, which is their newest model, is actually operating as a level 2 AI, which is reasoning. And this is where chatbots can now reason and infer and contextualize information in real time. And as I read that, or as I listened to this interview, I was really blown away by this. But then when he started talking about how achieving level 2 is really just massively accelerating the time to level 3. Where level 3 is agents, or AI-powered agents, that are going to be running continuously, and they're not just sitting in a browser responding to questions like we experience today with chatbots, but they're going to be autonomously acting on data and inputs that we feed it, and proactively driving outcomes. And this isn't 10 years away. This is being built. There's actually a guy in this room right now that's building the building blocks of agentic implementations. So this is coming, and the question then becomes, at the enterprise level, how do we actually adopt this? Because the reality is the demand is only going to increase. And here's another one. A Canada court ruled that Air Canada actually had to honor a refund policy that was made up by a chatbot, right? And again, I kind of chuckle at these, but then I also think, if your chatbot isn't making stuff up right now, you're probably not pushing the envelope on innovation enough. But again, if regulatory concerns, financial concerns, maybe your reputation in the industry, right, they can take a massive hit if you don't do this well. So I want to take just a minute to imagine the ultimate AI chatbot. What does that look like? And it starts with, thanks to Matt for some great content from the keynote, your AI is going to need to call APIs. Now let's get a show of hands if that terrifies you. Anybody? I know there's a few people that are really excited about it. But ultimately, right, if we start to think about what does an enterprise chatbot need, or what does the architecture need to look like to support that? It can't just be any regular old chatbot, right? It needs to operate in a dynamic, constantly shifting environment. It needs to be flexible, right? It needs to be able to be ready to adapt at a moment's notice. And ultimately, it has to be uncompromising on security. What else might it need? It might need access to live data anywhere in your stack, and it has to be instant. You need to be able to securely govern not only who can access what data, but how much, and there can be no mistakes, as I've mentioned. And then it seamlessly needs to operate across multiple disparate systems safely without ever breaking down. And now a moment ago, I mentioned that the pace of technology is only going to accelerate. So if your question is, like, how are we going to stop? Like, do we have to hit the pause button to start to build this magic architecture? Like, there's no way we're going to be able to have a technology ready to check all those boxes. And then furthermore, we're going to need some really smart people to come together to create companies that can drive this into the enterprise. And then beyond that, we're also going to need to be able to congregate in places to really allow people to collaborate and push the boundaries of what is possible. And so we heard about this at the keynote, this idea of graph-powered chatbots. And I'm going to spend a few more minutes talking about that. My countdown timer isn't working, so I'm just going to have to wing it here and hope that it comes within 30 minutes. But so I am Scott Silvey, as I mentioned. I am one of the founders and the head of engineering at a company called Duality. You've probably seen our logo out there. Many of you have probably shaken hands with John, who is our mosh-pitting, teddy bear-loving, wonderful human that's been manning our booth for the last few days. And really deep diving into AI with Graph has been our top priority for the last year. And I know many of us, I've been working in Graph since 2015. I was at the first summit in 2016. And I know many of us have been championing Graph for many years. And there's lots of reasons why we might have entered into Graph, whether it's for the efficiency or the developer experience, especially after seeing the tooling this morning in the keynote, or in yesterday's keynote as well. Maybe it's the granular control you get over APIs. Maybe it's the real-time capabilities that you can pretty quickly deploy to what have previously been static resources. And now after seeing Apollo Connector, maybe it's that higher level of abstraction that's going to allow APIs to live in the same world as your containerization layers and data layers and et cetera that we see in cloud native. So we've all been on this journey for a long time, many, many years for a lot of us. And one of the things that has always struck me about Graph is this realization that there are many second and third order effects to adopting Graph, right? There are many benefits that will come from adopting Graph that we haven't even recognized yet. But also imagine pitching that to your leadership. Hey, awesome technology, and there are so many reasons why this is going to be great and this is going to impact our business in a positive way. Oh, please tell me about them. Well, here are some of them, but then there are also a ton of them that I just can't tell you about yet. Right? What I'm really excited about is this idea that while we were doing all of the work to solve these complex API challenges, what we didn't realize is that we were also building the perfect architecture for chatbots and future AI agents, and we get that largely for free, right? Because if we go back to where I was describing the ultimate chatbot for the enterprise, right? We need that flexibility, we need that precision, we need that security. And what do we get with Graph? Well, we have a dynamic queryable interface that lets us access exactly the data we need, no more, no less. We get the runtime layer where we can enforce policies and access controls in real time. And with Apollo, we get persistent queries, we get a router, we get schema contracts, we get all the things that Apollo offers that gives us a lot of what we need to start building actual, secure, intelligent, scalable chatbots today. So I think it's pretty cool that we can have all the reasons and justifications for why Graph, and then have something as impactful as AI and chatbots enter the equation, and for Graph to be dynamic and flexible enough to say, hey, I'm in. So I was going to do this part of the demo where I go in, I ask a question, and the chatbot's like, hey, I don't know how to do that. And then I act all flustered and awkward and give you secondhand embarrassment for me. And then I run a command that was called foreshadow. And behind the scenes, it was going to do some things, and then I was going to ask the same question without redeploying, and it was going to give an answer. And I could still do that, but that's what happened at the keynote. So I'll save you that second round of secondhand embarrassment and just start to walk through. Let me get over here. All right, so the idea is I can ask, the question I was intending to ask here was just to introduce me. Chatbot was going to say, can't do it. So I would actually rather spend a few more minutes kind of getting into a little bit more of the technical aspects of what's happening under the hood. I know if you were lucky to get into Matt's workshop on Tuesday, you may have covered a lot of this. I also know that line was well out the door, and most of you didn't get in because it was a very hot topic. So I'll spend a few minutes just diving into that portion, and I'm going to just make sure I run the correct command here. Yes, it was pnpm foreshadow, just to make sure my environment is set up for a little bit more in the demo. So the one question I will ask is, what is this? What can you tell me about this talk? I'll get to the Kraken 4x4 Shopify AI assistant in a little bit. And you can see I'm basically just stealing 10 of the best slides from that workshop that Matt presented and talking about them in depth. I've been working with the Apollo team on this talk for the last, 4 or 6 weeks, I think. And it really was born out of this idea of graph-powered chatbots. And my team actually went out and built more or less the same architecture, different technology, but same architecture. The week we delivered it is the week that GraphChat, which is the repository that has been showcased this week. That was the week that was open sourced. So instead, I'll spend a few more minutes talking about AI, and then I'll circle back into graph. So everyone at the keynote yesterday, you heard Ben Flass from Mongo talk about reg a little bit. So this won't be a 101 or even a 201 or 201 or even a 101 on AI, but I just want to take a minute to talk about the evolution of chatbots and kind of where we've been and where we're going. So initially, right, when we had early versions of ChatGPT, for example, we would simply ask questions, and in like GPT-2, the answers were, again, really comical, not even toddler level equivalent. But pretty quickly, the models started to improve. And on the other side, not just the models improved, but we started to improve the quality of the questions that we'd ask, right? So this is a topic called prompt engineering. I'm sure many of us have heard of this. And there's several layers within that, few shot examples, chain of thought, where you actually give the LLM time to think is kind of the analog there. There's RLHF, which is reinforced learning via human feedback. And then there's RAG. And all of these are designed to help produce a more deterministic and reliable outcome. And this architecture alone is what has supported chatbots to the broad-reaching levels that we see today, but there are some limitations. Number one is it's largely, and there will be, there's caveats and exceptions with all of these, but it's largely a static experience built on static data, right? So imagine you go ask ChatGPT right now a question about something that happened, yesterday. It's going to respond with something like, I'm only current through July of 2024, or something equivalent, right? You've probably seen that before. It's also hard to enforce complex policies. So a lot of the security policies that don't just govern the data within our APIs, but when you consider the many different APIs with many different security policies that might be applied, it's really hard to do this well, particularly in the enterprise. And it gets very complex very quickly. And then lastly, it's a very read-heavy operation today. There are definitely ways to mitigate all of this. You can have frequent re-indexing. You can even introduce live retrieval mechanisms. But again, all of this gets a lot more complicated when you're dealing with the many different layers and systems and security policies and so on that come with your standard enterprise architecture. So that's a little bit about AI, and I've been talking for now 17 minutes and have talked mostly about AI. I want to talk about now graph, and where does the graph and why does the graph become such a good architecture for this? So yesterday, Suray had a great talk on contracts, and he said something at the end that I'm absolutely going to steal for this talk and the way I describe this in the future, which is when you use contracts within the graph, you can produce AI-safe schemas, right? So the ability to decorate either entities or even at the field level, certain tags that say this data is exposed and available to your AI chatbot, but not to, but other fields may not be, right? So you have that even field level control over data that you really can't do well outside of graph, right? It's one of the most powerful aspects of graph. moving into the defense in depth Graph OS portion, right? So I love this slide because I think it really encompasses a lot of the power of the security of Graph, because it's not just a single point, right? Like, you can define policy definitions at the application level, you can define them at the subgraph level. Of course, they all get enforced at the router. On the subgraph side, you have individual teams who are closest to their domain able to define security policies for their particular subgraph. On the application side, instead of just allowing massive access to your full graph, right, you can use persisted queries, a whitelisted set of operations, to ensure that only the safe-listed or whitelisted operations can actually be executed by your clients. And those clients can be, historically they've been apps, mobile apps, web apps. Now you can start to think about them in terms of, chatbots and AI agents. But with pre-registered operations like this, you get to avoid the query exploration, and then, more importantly, the arbitrary queries from those bad actors, or even just unknown actors, right? And what happens is, if a bad actor attempts to execute an unregistered operation within a safe-listed environment, or supergraph, the router will just reject it, right? So there's no additional work required. If it's not in the safe list, it will be rejected. And if you think back to the keynote yesterday, that is what was happening under the hood. When Watson was making that initial request and it said, hey, I don't have access to that information, because there simply wasn't an operation that had been whitelisted yet for that use case. And then he ran the command, same as my foreshadowing command, that then whitelisted the operation, vectorized that particular operation, and made it available to the LLM. And so that then brings kind of all of this together of, where do Graph and LLMs fit together? And really, it's this idea of being able to take natural language, pairing it with your schema, and allowing the LLM to determine which operation within my safe list should I execute. And then query plans get built, Graph gets called, query plans get built, data is returned, resolved, and sent back to the user. And fundamentally, this is that core architecture that we're talking about. So as I said, you actually start in the bottom right with your operations. You vectorize them into a vector data store. We're using Atlas in this example from Mongo. Then when a standalone question comes in, it's able to take just the base, either the base model that is available, or if you do even custom tuning for Graph, and then use that text-to-query model to identify which operation to call and go call the graph. And so this is fundamentally, when we say graph-powered chatbots, this is at least an approach for how to do that. So if we go back to Reg for just a brief moment, we talked about how some of the limitations of the static experience built on static data, hard to enforce policies, and no rights. And of course, with Graph, we get all of those things. We get that dynamic, flexible runtime environment that historically we haven't been able to have, particularly in the enterprise with Reg. All right, so now I'm going to get to an actual demo. And I'll set the stage here for just a moment. This is also being built on top of a Shopify shopping experience. It's kind of a common theme because it's a pretty easy use case to help demonstrate a lot of what's going on here. And in this case, we're using Shopify because it has a graph. So imagine, if you will, that you're a consumer, and one of your hobbies is overlanding, right? This is like off-roading, but instead of going out for 2 or 3 hours, you might go out for 2 or 3 days or weeks. When you go off-roading for 2 or 3 weeks, you typically need a lot of custom equipment, right? You need extra electronics to make that experience more enjoyable. And so what we've built is just a simple shop kind of around that concept. So I'll just go ahead and refresh. Doesn't really matter, but and so you're a customer. You've come to this Shopify store, and we're going to do some exploration about what this particular company offers. So what vehicles do you support? That might be a good first question. And so under the hood, there's actually an operation that has been whitelisted that gives access to these products. And this is actually calling the Shopify graph. And you can see it's getting the 4 vehicles that are supported by Kraken, which is an actual company and actually supports these 4 vehicles. And so from here, we can continue the exploration, right? Maybe, in this case, I might go and inquire about what accessories are supported by Kraken. Well, maybe I'll start by just letting the chatbot know that I do happen to have the 2021 third gen Tundra. So I've got 7 minutes left. I don't think I have enough time to walk through all of the things and type through all of the things I wanted to do. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to ask the chatbot here, let them know that I'm actually on stage right now giving a talk. Could this chatbot please just give me a call to continue the conversation? Unfortunately, this is a read-only operation. Chatbot can't do that. So I think if you've been paying attention to either this talk or the keynote or some of the other AI-focused talks in this conference, all I simply need to do is execute a command, which is running here, to publish a mutation. And that mutation will actually call, using the Twilio API under the hood, and that mutation will, through the graph, ultimately call my phone. And this is where the demo gods. This worked 100% of the time until I came here this week. And it's failed about 3 times this week, so the good news is I also have a recording. The bad news is I recorded that in my Airbnb, and there's with no professional sound equipment, so if you're an audiophile, now might be the time to exit stage right. All right, so my operation is published. Let's go ahead and see, hey, could you try calling me again? Whoop, with a slash, cool. All right. This is Mike Walker's phone number. Just kidding. Fake phone number.
Hey, Scott. Picking back up from where we left off on your 2021 Tundra, would you like to learn more about our product or perhaps explore a list of accessories?
Yeah, I would love to actually hear a little bit more about the product. No, I would not love to hear about the product. All right, I'll play the audio. Demo god's not in my favor. So what's happening there, right, is the call actually picks up. It's using the same conversation ID, right? And so we've been through those situations where maybe we call our bank and it asks to verify some information, and then we get passed over to another automated system and it verifies more information, but it's actually the same information. And then we go to like 2 or 3 more humans and we do the same process, right? Like, this is not a great customer experience. But one of the challenges we have when we start with that chatbot experience is we're often very limited in what we're able to do. And so part of what we have been thinking about at Duality is what does this look like in the future? Once we unlock the ability to securely and safely call data from our LLMs, what does that look like? And so what my amazing audio would have demonstrated was just a seamless transition from one experience to the next, right? Where instead of having that annoying experience, you're instead creating a delightful experience, right? And ultimately what I do in that conversation is I simply, I add some accessories to a cart, and then I do another thing which is cool, which is I actually do a write operation and send this data out to an upfitter to do the work, because I am not the person you ever want doing electronics on anything ever, anywhere. And so ultimately, I think the art of the possible here is where things start to get really interesting, right? Like, it's not just limited to a chatbot user interface, but when we start going back to the different levels of AI, when we start thinking about reasoning engines, AI that can actually reason, and then when it can do it in the background at all times, this isn't one of those things that's gonna be 5 or 10 years out. Like, reasoning is happening right now. AI agents are being developed, the core, the foundations of them are being developed, and it's going to happen very quickly. And if we want to take advantage of that, I think for me, we all know that AI is the future. I'm on the wrong. I have 4 different displays going right now. It's very exciting. All right. So we all know that AI is the future, and it's really up to us to decide whether or not we want GraphQL to be the future of AI within the enterprise. I have now learned at the very last slide that I don't hit this button. I hit that button. All right, so that's it for me. Again, I'm Scott Sylvian, the head of engineering at Duality. We're going to be having a bit of an AI chat. I've got some of my good friends in the AI world here today. So we're going to be out at the booth the next couple hours, probably just nerding out about AI. So if you have any questions about that or chatbots in general, I'm happy to deep dive. And that's all I got.